The millionaire came home early, and the maid, pale with fear, silenced him with a sharp shut-up that sliced through the air. Something terrible hid behind the closed doors, where forced smiles concealed an invisible horror. On the other side of the wall, his children trembled under the sweet yet cruel voice of someone pretending to protect them. That night, truth slipped through the cracks, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sun was beginning to set over the gardens of the Miller estate in Belle Haven, an affluent neighborhood in Greenwich, Connecticut. Robert Miller, 45, a real estate developer and owner of one of the largest development companies in the country, drove his Porsche Cayenne down the avenue of stately oak trees that led to the main entrance of his property. It wasn't common for him to arrive at that hour. Meetings usually stretched late into the night, and his children would already be asleep by the time he finally returned home. But that day, something bothered him. During a video call with Michael, his 10-year-old son, he had noticed deep dark circles under his eyes and a tremor in his voice that didn't match the boy's usual cheerfulness. When he questioned him, the child looked away and abruptly ended the conversation. That had left him uneasy all day. After the passing of Eliza, his wife, 2 years ago, Robert had plunged headfirst into business, leaving the upbringing of Michael and Beatrice, Kate, under the care of Eleanor, his late wife's cousin, who had offered to move into the mansion and look after the children. The proposal seemed perfect at the time. The little ones would have a female figure present, and he could dedicate himself to the empire he had built, which now served as a refuge for his grief. As he parked, Robert noticed something different. The house was too silent, almost as if holding its breath. Normally, even at that hour, there would be music coming from the piano Beatrice was learning to play, or the sound of the television with Michael's cartoons. "Mr. Miller?" The voice came almost as a whisper. Mrs. Janet, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for over a decade, appeared at the kitchen door. She was a woman in her early 50s, with time-worn brown skin and graying hair always pulled back in a discreet bun. Her brown eyes, usually calm and respectful, now conveyed an urgency Robert had never seen. "Mrs. Janet, is there a problem?" he asked, placing his briefcase on the marble console table in the hall. She approached with quick steps, looking nervously down the corridors, as if fearing to be overheard. "Sir, I need you to come with me now, and please," without making a sound. The firmness in the woman's voice, normally so discreet that sometimes days passed without Robert noticing her presence, caught him by surprise. Mrs. Janet had never addressed him in that manner. "What's going on? Where are the children? And Eleanor?" "Please, sir," she insisted with an urgency that bordered on desperation. "Come with me first. Then I'll explain everything." Intrigued and increasingly worried, Robert followed the housekeeper through the mansion's corridors. She led him the long way around, avoiding the main living room. Her steps were light, almost inaudible on the noble wooden floor. As they neared the library, Mrs. Janet raised her hand, signaling them to stop. Voices came from inside the room. One of them, Eleanor's, sounded cold and controlled. The others, higher-pitched and trembling, belonged to the children. "Beatrice, your handwriting is still atrocious. A girl your age, from a good family, writing like a street urchin. What must your teachers think?" "What must I think?" Eleanor's voice cut like a razor, even while maintaining a polite tone. "I'm sorry, Auntie," Beatrice's small voice replied, choked. "I'll try to do better. Trying isn't enough. You will copy this entire page 10 more times before bed. And no dinner tonight. Perhaps hunger will help you focus your effort." Robert felt his blood run cold. He stretched his neck to peek through the crack in the half-open door. In the library, Michael and Beatrice sat at the study table, surrounded by books and notebooks. Their postures were rigid, their shoulders tense. Eleanor paced around them like a vulture, observing every movement. "And you, Michael," she continued, stopping behind the boy. "Professor Marcus called me today. He said you're distracted in math class. Do you know what happens to distracted boys? They become failed men." She gripped the boy's chin tightly, forcing him to look at her. "Is that what you want? To be a failure like your cousin Peter, who ended up peddling trinkets on street corners?" Robert saw his son swallow hard, his eyes welling up. "No, Aunt Eleanor." "Good, then we'll review all of this semester's material today. And no complaints." Mrs. Janet pulled Robert away before he could be seen. She led him to the service area, a place where the children and Eleanor rarely went. "This happens every day, sir," she whispered, finally breaking the silence. "Ever since Miss Eleanor arrived. At first I thought it was just discipline, that it was her way. But it got worse. Why didn't you ever tell me anything?" Robert asked, his voice trembling with contained rage. Mrs. Janet lowered her eyes. "I tried, sir. 3 times. The first time you said you were too busy and trusted Miss Eleanor's judgment. The second time you were on the phone and asked me to come back later, but when I came back you had already left. The third time," she hesitated, "the third time Miss Eleanor overheard me talking to you and then threatened me. She said that if I said anything else, she would make you fire me, and that no one would believe a housekeeper over her." Robert ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of guilt. He really hadn't paid attention to Mrs. Janet's attempts. He was always rushing, always too busy to notice the suffering within his own home. The children never said anything. "They're afraid, sir. Miss Eleanor is very clever. She never leaves marks, never yells when you're home. What she does is worse. She hurts them inside." Mrs. Janet took a small device from her apron pocket. "That's why I recorded it. I couldn't bear to see their suffering anymore." Robert took the old phone Mrs. Janet handed him. In the video, Eleanor was seen sitting on the edge of Beatrice's bed, speaking in a low, calm tone, but with words that pierced like needles. She told the girl that her mother had left because she wasn't a good enough daughter, that her father worked late so he wouldn't have to look at her. In another video, Michael was forced to kneel on corn kernels for getting a C- on a test, while Eleanor calmly read a book in an armchair nearby. "I started recording 2 weeks ago when I realized no one would believe me without proof. I hoped to gather the courage to show you. But today, when I saw you arrive early, I thought it was a sign." Robert felt his stomach churn. How had he not noticed? How had he allowed this to happen under his own roof? The children suppressed crying during weekend dinners, the change in their behavior, the fear in their eyes when Eleanor entered the room. All the signs were there. "Thank you, Mrs. Janet," he said, returning the phone. "You did what I should have done. Now I need to get my children out of this situation." "Sir," Mrs. Janet lightly touched his arm, "if you confront Miss Eleanor now, she will deny everything." "She's very convincing. We need a plan." Robert nodded, recognizing the wisdom in the housekeeper's words. Eleanor was manipulative and had a special talent for distorting reality. "What do you suggest?" "Every night after dinner, she sends the children to their room and goes up to check if they're studying. Then she comes down and stays in the music room for half an hour before going back upstairs. If you can wait until then." Robert looked at his watch. 7:30 in the evening. Dinner would have already happened. "I won't wait another minute knowing what's going on," he replied, determination burning in his eyes. "I'm taking my children out of that library right now." Mrs. Janet clasped her hands nervously. "Sir, please think carefully. Miss Eleanor is very clever. If she realizes you know, she'll invent stories. She'll manipulate the children to deny everything." Robert paused, considering the housekeeper's words. She knew the house routine better than he did. 15 minutes, he conceded finally. "I'll wait 15 minutes, no more. And I want you to stay with the children while I talk to Eleanor." Mrs. Janet nodded, relief on her face. "Thank you, sir. I'll get them a snack. Miss Eleanor rarely lets them eat properly." While Mrs. Janet prepared sandwiches in the kitchen, Robert watched the clock, each second feeling like an eternity. Anger grew within him like a storm, but he knew he needed to be strategic. For his children. The longest 15 minutes of his life finally passed. As Mrs. Janet had predicted, Eleanor came downstairs promptly at 7:45. From his hiding place in the office, Robert saw her walk towards the music room with elegant steps. She wore an impeccable tailored suit, her brown hair perfectly styled in a bun, her nails manicured. The image of perfection and sophistication he had always admired now seemed like a sinister mask. "Let's go," Mrs. Janet whispered, holding a tray with sandwiches and juice. "The children are in the library." They went up silently by the service staircase. On the way, Robert noticed details of the house he had never seen before. Photos of him with his children that were turned to the wall, children's drawings that once decorated the refrigerator now gone. The absence of toys or any sign that children inhabited that space. Eleanor had transformed the mansion into a cold, sterile environment just like herself. Upon reaching the library, they found Michael and Beatrice still hunched over their books, despite the late hour. Beatrice repeatedly wrote the same phrase in her notebook, her little fingers red from gripping the pencil so tightly. Michael solved complex mathematical equations far beyond his age, his eyes red with fatigue. When the door opened, the children instantly straightened up like little soldiers at attention. The fear in their eyes turned to confusion upon seeing their father. They dared not move or speak as if fearing a trap. "Dad?" Michael finally murmured, uncertain. Robert felt his heart clench. His children seemed like strangers before him, with cautious looks that no child should have. "Hi, champ," he said, approaching slowly. "Hi, princess." Beatrice quickly glanced at the door, as if expecting Eleanor to appear at any moment to punish them. "Aunt Eleanor said we can't stop until we finish," she whispered, fear evident in her childish voice. Mrs. Janet placed the tray on the table. "You can eat, children." "It's all right." Michael looked at the sandwich with suspicion. "But what if Aunt Eleanor finds out?" "She won't find out," Robert said, kneeling between his children's chairs. "And even if she does, it's okay. I'm here now." Beatrice, still hesitant, looked at her father with tear-filled eyes. "She'll be angry." "Very angry." Robert felt physical pain as he realized the degree of fear his children felt. He placed his hands on their tense little shoulders. "Look at me," he asked gently. "No one will be angry with you." "Never again." "You're not doing anything wrong." The children exchanged glances, as if consulting each other about the truthfulness of that promise. "Aunt Eleanor said we're lazy," Michael finally spoke, "that we don't deserve rest until we're the best in class. And that our handwriting is ugly," Beatrice added, showing her little hands with calluses on her fingers. "And that good family girls can't have ugly handwriting." Robert took a deep breath, controlling the rage that threatened to overwhelm him. He didn't want to scare his children any further. "You know that's not true, right? You are wonderful children. You don't need to be perfect." The words seemed foreign to the children, who stared at him with suspicion. How long had they lived under that regime of fear and pressure? How long had Robert been absorbed in his own world, leaving his children at the mercy of that woman? Mrs. Janet, sensing the tension, intervened with her simple wisdom. "How about you eat a little? I made it just the way you like it, with melted cheese." Slowly, hesitantly, the children picked up the sandwiches. They ate slowly, still looking nervously at the door. "Dad," Michael asked between bites, "are you leaving again?" The question hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Although he was physically present on weekends, he realized that emotionally he had been absent for much longer. "No, son, I'm not leaving. In fact," he looked at Mrs. Janet, seeking confirmation, "I was thinking of us taking a vacation, just the three of us. What do you think?" The children's eyes widened, surprised by the proposal. "Can we really?" Beatrice asked, a glimmer of hope finally appearing in her eyes. "Of course you can," Robert smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. "We can go to the beach or to Grandpa's farm in upstate New York." "Will Aunt Eleanor let us?" Michael interrupted, concern returning to his face. Robert exchanged a meaningful glance with Mrs. Janet. It was time to put an end to that fear once and for all. "Aunt Eleanor doesn't decide anything in this house anymore," he said firmly. "I am your father. I decide." The children seemed not to believe it. Years of manipulation wouldn't be undone in minutes. "But she said you like work more than us," Beatrice commented softly. "That's why you let her take care of us." Robert felt as if he had been slapped. It was true that he had buried himself in work after Eliza's loss. The pain of seeing his beloved wife's face in his children had been overwhelming. But he had never imagined that this would be interpreted as abandonment, much less used against them. "That's not true, my love," he said, holding his daughter's tiny hands. "Daddy loves you more than anything in the world. I made a mistake by staying away for so long, but that will change. I promise." Michael, always more suspicious, still didn't seem convinced. "Aunt Eleanor said Mum left because we weren't good enough." Mrs. Janet let out a gasp of indignation, and Robert had to restrain the urge to go immediately after Eleanor. How dared she use Eliza's memory in such a cruel way? "Look at me," he said, holding both children's faces in his hands. "Your mother loved you more than anything in this world. She didn't choose to leave. It was an illness, remember? And if she were here now, she would be very, very proud of both of you." Tears finally escaped Beatrice's eyes. Michael resisted a little longer, but soon he too was crying. Robert hugged them, feeling their small bodies tremble against his. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Michael sobbed. "I tried to be good, I swear I tried." "I tried too," Beatrice murmured through tears. "I did everything Aunt Eleanor told me to." "You don't need to apologize for anything," Robert said, his own voice choked. "You didn't do anything wrong." Mrs. Janet watched the scene with tears in her eyes. She knew this was just the beginning of a long healing process. The emotional wounds Eleanor had inflicted would not disappear overnight. "Sir," she said softly, "it's almost time for Miss Eleanor to come back upstairs." Robert nodded, discreetly wiping his own tears before turning to his children. "Let's do this. Mrs. Janet will take you to my room. There's a TV there. You can watch whatever you want while I talk to Aunt Eleanor." Michael seemed alarmed. "But she'll be very angry with you." "Don't worry about that," Robert assured, smiling to calm his son. "Adults talking to adults, okay? You don't need to worry." Beatrice still seemed insecure. "Promise you won't leave us alone with her again." "I promise, my princess. Never again." Mrs. Janet helped the children get up, taking the tray with the remaining snacks. "Come on, children. We can watch that cooking show you like." Before they left, Robert hugged his children again, harder this time, as if to compensate for all the hugs he hadn't given in recent months. "I love you," he whispered, "more than anything in the world." The children left through the back door of the library, following Mrs. Janet the long way around to avoid encountering Eleanor. Robert remained in the library, organizing his thoughts. Rage pulsed within him, but he knew he needed to be strategic. He picked up Mrs. Janet's phone, which she had left on the table, and watched a few more videos. In one of them, Eleanor was on the phone laughing about how she was training the children to be perfect. For when she finally became the new Mrs. Miller, her plan had always been this: to use his children as pawns in her game to win his money and position. Robert heard footsteps in the corridor. Eleanor was coming back. He put the phone in his pocket and waited, sitting in the chair that minutes before had been occupied by his daughter. The time for reckoning had come. Eleanor entered the library with the studied elegance that always characterized her. She wore a basic yet designer black dress that accentuated her slender silhouette. Seeing Robert sitting in Beatrice's chair, she froze for an instant, but quickly composed herself, adjusting the calculated smile she reserved for him. "Robert!" "What a wonderful surprise!" she exclaimed. Approaching to kiss his cheek, he subtly pulled away, avoiding contact. "I didn't know you'd be back so early today. Why didn't you tell me? I would have prepared something special for dinner." The false cheerfulness in her voice now sounded like an offense to Robert's ears. How had he not noticed the artificiality in every word and gesture before? "Where are the children?" Eleanor asked, looking around the library. "They should be studying. Michael has an important test tomorrow, and Beatrice hasn't finished the calligraphy exercises I assigned." "I sent them to rest," Robert replied, carefully observing her reaction. "It's almost 8 o'clock, Eleanor. Time for children to be playing or getting ready for bed. Not studying as if they were preparing for college entrance exams." Eleanor's smile wavered for a second, but soon returned, even wider and falser. "Oh, Robert, you know how competitive the world is these days. If we don't start early with academic discipline, they'll fall behind, and I'm sure you don't want that for your children." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a practiced gesture of concern. "I imagine you're tired and worried about business. Let me take care of their education as we agreed." Robert slowly rose from the chair, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. The woman in front of him was a stranger, someone who had used his family's vulnerability to infiltrate and cause pain. "You know what's interesting, Eleanor?" he began, his voice controlled. "I spent the last 2 years believing I was lucky to have you in my children's lives. I thought I was offering them a female figure, someone who could fill a little of the void left by Eliza. And you were." Eleanor smiled, apparently relieved that the conversation was taking a friendlier turn. "I know I've been strict at times, but it's only because I care about them. I want them to have a brilliant future." "A brilliant future," Robert repeated thoughtfully. "Is that a genuine concern for them, or for access to their money when they grow up?" Eleanor's smile vanished completely. "What are you talking about, Robert? I'm shocked you would think such a thing of me, after everything I've sacrificed to be here." "Sacrificed?" Robert raised an eyebrow. "You left a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York, to come live in a mansion in Belle Haven. with a driver, staff, and an unlimited credit card. Tell me, exactly what the sacrifice was, Eleanor. She took a step back, the mask of gentleness beginning to crack. You're different today, Robert. I think it's better if we talk tomorrow when you're calmer. Robert took Mrs. Janet's phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. I saw the videos, Eleanor. Her face instantly paled. For a brief moment, genuine shock appeared on her features, before being replaced by performative indignation. What videos? What are you talking about? I think you know very well, he replied, remaining calm. But if you need me to be more specific, videos of you telling my 8-year-old daughter that her mother died because she wasn't good enough. Of you forcing my son to kneel on corn kernels for hours. Of you threatening to hit them if they told me anything. Eleanor opened and closed her mouth several times, like a fish out of water. Her calculating mind was already searching for an escape. That's absurd. Who showed you that? It was that meddling housekeeper, wasn't it? That Janet? Her voice rose an octave. You can't believe her, Robert. She's been jealous of me ever since I arrived, always wanting to harm me. She probably manipulated those videos, took things out of context. Robert smiled humorlessly. Is that your defense? Attacking Mrs. Janet, the woman who has been more of a mother to my children in recent months than you ever were? You don't understand. Eleanor tried to approach, changing her strategy. Her eyes were now watery, tears perfectly calculated to evoke compassion. They are difficult children, Robert. They test limits all the time. They need firmness. And yes, maybe I exaggerated at times, but it was always with their best interests at heart. Firmness, Robert repeated, incredulous. You call it firmness to tell children who have lost their mother that they are the reason for their father's unhappiness? That's cruelty, Eleanor. Calculated cruelty. Realizing that the emotional theatrics weren't working, Eleanor changed tactics again. Her posture hardened and her gaze became cold. You're never here, Robert, never. Who do you think is raising your children? Who do you think is shaping their character for the future? Me, while you hide in your office, running away from the responsibility of being a father. The words hit Robert like a physical blow because they contained a grain of truth. He had indeed withdrawn, immersed himself in work to avoid facing the pain. But that did not justify what Eleanor had done. You're right on one point, he admitted, surprising her. I failed as a father. I left my children vulnerable to someone like you. And it's a mistake I will never make again. What does that mean? Eleanor asked, narrowing her eyes. It means I want you out of my house now. Eleanor let out a dry laugh. You can't be serious. Who will take care of the children? You, the great businessman who barely manages to have dinner with his children once a week? That's not your concern. It is my concern. She raised her voice, completely losing her composure. I invested 2 years of my life in this family. 2 years? I have rights. Rights? Robert raised his eyebrows. What rights, exactly? You are not my wife, Eleanor. You are not my children's mother. You are a distant cousin of Eliza, who offered to help and betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. You can't just dismiss me like this, she shouted, stamping her foot like a thwarted child. I'll sue you. They'll say you promised to marry me, that you made me give up my life to be here. Feel free, Robert replied calmly, picking up the phone from the table. I'm sure the judge will be very interested in these videos, and in the testimonies of my children, and Mrs. Janet, and the driver, who commented to me several times how the children trembled when you got into the car. Eleanor's face contorted into a mask of hatred, finally revealing her true nature. You'll regret this, Robert Miller. No one treats me like this and gets away with it. Is that a threat? He asked, still maintaining his calm. Because it sounds like one. And threats make great additions to legal proceedings. Eleanor lunged across the table, trying to snatch the phone from his hand. Robert quickly recoiled. Give that back. Those are illegal recordings. She had no right to film me without consent. Funny you should worry about rights now, Robert commented, putting the device back in his pocket. Where was that concern when you were violating my children's rights to a healthy and happy childhood? Eleanor breathed heavily, her chest rising and falling in waves of fury. For a moment, it seemed she would physically attack Robert, but she restrained herself. Her eyes calculated, planned. All right, she said finally, adjusting her dress and regaining some composure. I'm leaving, But this isn't over, Robert. You can't just discard me like a used object. I'm not discarding you, Eleanor. I'm protecting my children. Something I should have done from the start. She laughed, a cold, humorless sound. Those brats don't know how lucky they are. Spoiled, weak crybabies. They'll never be anything in life without discipline. Get out of my house, Robert ordered, his voice now laden with contained rage. You have 1 hour to pack your personal belongings. The rest you can have picked up tomorrow with supervision. And if I hear that you've approached my children to say anything, there will be no place in this country where you can hide from me. Eleanor stared at him for a few seconds, as if evaluating whether it was worth continuing the battle. Finally, she spun on her heels and left the library, slamming the door shut. Robert waited for her footsteps to fade before collapsing into the chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. The confrontation had been necessary but painful. The overwhelming sense of guilt for not having realized what was happening to his children sooner was crushing. A few minutes later, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was Mrs. Janet. Sir, is everything all right? I heard noises. It is, Mrs. Janet, he replied, running a hand over his tired face. She's packing her things to leave now. The housekeeper entered the library, her face marked with concern. The children are watching television in your room, as you asked. But they're scared. They heard some shouting. I'll talk to them, Robert stood up. And you, are you all right? Eleanor mentioned you might have problems for recording the videos. Mrs. Janet raised her chin, a silent dignity in her gaze. I'm prepared for whatever comes, sir. I did what was right. I couldn't bear to see those children suffering without doing anything. Robert approached and, in a gesture that surprised both of them, hugged the housekeeper. Thank you, he said, his voice choked. You saved my family. Mrs. Janet, initially tense with the unexpected contact, relaxed and awkwardly patted her employer's back. They are good children, sir. They deserve to be happy. Robert pulled away, discreetly wiping his eyes. You deserve it too, Mrs. Janet. And if you wish, I'd like you to stay with us, not just as a housekeeper, but helping to care for the children, with a salary appropriate to the new role, of course. Mrs. Janet's eyes widened in surprise. I would be honored, sir. Excellent, Robert smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Now let's see how my children are. We have a lot to rebuild. As they ascended the stairs towards the master bedroom, they heard the sound of Eleanor dragging suitcases down the corridor, followed by the violent slam of the front door. She had left, but both knew that the consequences of her presence in that family's life would linger for a long time. In the bedroom, Michael and Beatrice were huddled on Robert's enormous king-size bed, clinging to each other, staring fixedly at the television program without really watching. When they saw their father and Mrs. Janet enter, their tense bodies visibly relaxed. Has she gone? Michael asked, his small voice breaking the silence. Robert sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out his hands to his children. Yes, champ. She won't be coming back. Beatrice looked at her father with still suspicious eyes. Never again? Never again, he confirmed. I promise. The children exchanged glances as if they couldn't quite believe this new reality. Can I sleep with you tonight, Dad? Beatrice asked timidly. Of course you can, Princess. In fact, how about both of you sleep here tonight? We can have a sort of camp-out. Michael smiled for the first time that night, a genuine smile that lit up his little face, marked by premature worry. Can Mrs. Janet stay too? He asked, looking at the housekeeper with affection. Mrs. Janet blushed, embarrassed. Oh no, Michael, that wouldn't be appropriate. But you can stay until we fall asleep, Robert suggested, realizing how safe his children felt in the woman's presence. You can tell a story like you used to when they were younger. Remember? Mrs. Janet smiled, recalling the times when Eliza was still alive and the house was truly happy. She used to help with the children occasionally, telling stories from Brazilian folklore that she had learned from her grandmother. I can tell you the story of the Sachi, she suggested, sitting in an armchair near the bed. It was always Michael's favorite. And the Iara for me afterwards? Beatrice asked, snuggling among the pillows. All the stories you want, Mrs. Janet promised, settling in. Robert watched the scene, feeling a mixture of gratitude and determination grow within him. This was just the first day of a long healing journey. Many challenges lay ahead, traumas to overcome, trust to rebuild, a new family dynamic to establish. But looking at the faces of his children, Now relaxing with Mrs. Janet's stories, he knew he would do anything to make up for lost time and protect them from any harm. It was time to be the father they deserved. The first few weeks without Eleanor were a mix of relief and challenge. Robert reorganized his professional life to be more present at home. Morning meetings were moved to video conference, which he conducted after taking the children to school. Dinners became sacred moments, where cell phones and tablets were banned from the table. One Saturday morning, a month after Eleanor's departure, Robert was making pancakes in the kitchen, something he hadn't done since Eliza was alive. The batter wasn't exactly how she used to make it. It was a little lumpy, to be honest, but the sweet smell filled the house with a long-forgotten sense of normalcy. "Can I put chocolate on it?" Beatrice asked, already holding the Nutella jar, a mischievous glint in her eyes that had once been so cautious. "Of course you can, Princess, but don't overdo it, okay?" Too late. The girl was already pouring a generous amount of the spread onto her pancake, laughing when her father feigned horror at the excess. Michael entered the kitchen, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled and a book under his arm. Not a school book, but an adventure story Robert had bought for him the previous week. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, Bea," he greeted, sitting next to his sister. His eyes lit up at the sight of the stack of pancakes. "Can I put banana on mine?" "You can put whatever you want, champ. Today is a day to make it just the way we like it." The boy smiled, a genuine smile that still surprised Robert every time it appeared. Gradually, Michael was returning to the cheerful, curious child he had been before Eleanor's arrival. Mrs. Janet appeared at the kitchen door, wearing not her usual uniform, but a simple set of pants and a blouse, more suitable for her new position in the house. Officially, she was now the governess and assistant in childcare, with a tripled salary and regular days off. "Good morning." "Family," she smiled, observing the pleasant mess that had formed in the kitchen. "I see you're having fun without me." "Mrs. Janet," Beatrice exclaimed, running to hug the woman. "Daddy made pancakes, but they have little bumps." "Hey!" Robert protested, feigning indignation. "Those bumps are part of the Miller family's secret recipe." Everyone laughed, including Mrs. Janet, who now seemed more at ease, showing affection and participating in family moments. The rigid hierarchy that once existed between employer and employee had softened, transforming into a relationship of mutual respect and, increasingly, friendship. "I have a surprise for you," Robert announced after everyone had finished eating. "How about we spend the weekend at the beach? We can go to the Hamptons today and come back Sunday night." The children exploded in shouts of joy, jumping from their chairs. "Can I bring my bodyboard?" Michael asked, already imagining himself on the waves. "And can I bring my little seashell bucket?" Beatrice added, equally excited. "You can bring whatever you want," Robert replied, happy with the reaction. "Mrs. Janet, you're coming with us, of course." The housekeeper seemed surprised by the invitation. "Me? But sir, it's a family outing." "And you're part of this family now," Robert completed firmly. "Besides, the children would love to have you there, wouldn't they?" "Yes," Michael and Beatrice agreed in unison. Mrs. Janet felt her eyes well up. Never in all her years working in family homes had she been treated with such respect and inclusion. "All right then," she agreed, disguising her emotion. "But only if I can help prepare things for the trip." "Deal," Robert smiled. The morning passed amidst animated preparations. The children ran through the house sorting toys and clothes. Mrs. Janet organized snacks for the trip, and Robert checked the car. It was a scene of domestic normalcy that seemed like a dream after months of tension under Eleanor's regime. As they were almost ready to leave, the doorbell rang. Robert found it strange. He wasn't expecting visitors. Opening the door, he was met by a woman in a suit, a serious expression and a briefcase in hand. "Mr. Robert Miller?" she asked formally. "Yes, that's me. My name is Dr. Tanya Olson from Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous complaint about possible child abuse at this address. I'll need to ask some questions and, if possible, speak with the minors." Robert felt his blood run cold. Eleanor, it could only be her behind this. "Of course. Please come in," he replied, maintaining his calm. He knew he had nothing to fear, but the mere mention of abuse made him indignant, especially when he was finally rebuilding his relationship with his children. The caseworker entered, carefully observing the environment. Mrs. Janet appeared in the corridor, followed by Michael and Beatrice, who looked curiously at the stranger. "Children, this is Dr. Tanya," Robert explained calmly. "She's here to ask us some questions. Mrs. Janet, could you take the bags to the car while we talk?" The housekeeper nodded, understanding that Robert wanted to spare her from that uncomfortable moment. But before she could leave, the caseworker stopped her. "Do you also work here? I'd like you to stay if possible. I need to speak with all adults who live with the children." Mrs. Janet looked at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course," she replied, nervously adjusting her apron. "I'm Janet Alves, the family's governess." Dr. Tanya wrote something in her folder and asked to speak in the living room. Once settled, she explained the reason for her visit. "We received a very specific complaint," she began, looking directly at Robert. "According to the complainant, you allegedly expelled the children's guardian from the house, a relative of their deceased mother, who had cared for them for years, leaving them under the care of a domestic employee unqualified for such a role." Robert took a deep breath, controlling the anger that was starting to build. "That guardian you're referring to must be Eleanor Carlson, my late wife's second cousin. She did live here and helped with the children, but she was dismissed because I discovered she was psychologically abusing my children." The caseworker raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of this?" "I do," Robert replied promptly. "Videos recorded by Mrs. Janet showing Eleanor humiliating and threatening the children." Tanya turned to Mrs. Janet. "Would you confirm this?" "Yes, ma'am," Mrs. Janet replied with dignity. "I recorded it secretly because no one believed me when I tried to tell them what was happening." The caseworker made a few more notes, then asked to speak with the children alone. Robert hesitated initially but agreed, knowing it was standard procedure. "Michael, Beatrice, can you chat with Dr. Tanya for a bit? Daddy and Mrs. Janet will be right there in the kitchen, okay?" The children nodded, though Michael still seemed a little apprehensive. As they waited in the kitchen, Robert couldn't stand still, pacing back and forth. "She's going to try to take the children away from me," he murmured, more to himself than to Mrs. Janet. "No, sir, she won't," the housekeeper replied with conviction. "The children will tell the truth, and the truth is on our side." After what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Tanya called them back into the living room. Her demeanor had changed. She was softer, less accusatory. "I've spoken with your children, Mr. Miller," she said, closing her folder. "They are very intelligent and articulate children. They told me about what life was like with Miss Eleanor, and what it's like now." "And?" Robert asked, anxious. "And it's quite clear that there's no foundation to this complaint. In fact, it seems like a classic case of retaliation from the person who was removed from the children's lives." She smiled briefly. "Michael told me about the trip you're planning to the beach today. It sounds fun." Robert felt an immense relief wash over his body. Mrs. Janet smiled discreetly beside him. "Thank you for your understanding," he said. "It's my job," Tanya replied professionally. "I must inform you, however, that since there was a formal complaint, I will need to make a full report. It would be helpful to have access to the videos you mentioned so they can be included in the process. Of course, I can provide that on Monday." "Perfect." The caseworker stood up, preparing to leave. "Just one more thing, Mr. Miller. Your children mentioned that they've been having occasional nightmares and sometimes difficulty expressing their feelings. Have you considered psychological support to help them process what they've been through?" Robert blinked, surprised. He hadn't thought of that. "Actually, no. But it's an excellent suggestion. I have some contacts for professionals specializing in child trauma. I can email them to you if you'd like. I would greatly appreciate that." After the caseworker left, Robert gathered the children and Mrs. Janet in the living room. "Are we in trouble, Dad?" Michael asked, worried. "No, champ," Robert assured, hugging his son. "Quite the opposite." "You were very brave talking to Dr. Tanya." "She asked if we were happy now," Beatrice commented, playing with the hem of her dress. I said yes. "Very happy." Robert felt his heart warm at those simple words. There was still a long way to go, but they were heading in the right direction. "So," he said, standing up with new enthusiasm, "are we still going to the beach or not?" "Curtilt, yes." The children shouted in unison, running to grab their backpacks. Mrs. Janet watched the scene with a serene smile. When Robert approached her, he noticed that the woman seemed emotional. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Janet?" "It is, sir," she replied, discreetly wiping away a tear. It's just that when I recorded those videos, I was so scared. Scared of being fired, of not being believed, of making the children's situation worse. I never imagined we would get here. Robert gently touched her shoulder. You were braver than all of us. I can never thank you enough. Mrs. Janet waved her hand dismissively. No need to thank me, sir. Seeing these children happy again is reward enough. The weekend at the beach was exactly what everyone needed. The children built enormous sandcastles, played in the waves and ate ice cream until they couldn't anymore. Robert kept his phone on silent most of the time, dedicating himself entirely to his children. Mrs. Janet, initially shy in her role as a guest rather than an employee, soon relaxed when she saw that she was treated as part of the family by everyone. On Sunday night, returning home, Beatrice fell asleep in the car, her head resting on her brother's shoulder, who was also fighting sleep. Tanned with salt in their hair and smiles on their faces, they finally seemed like normal children, without the weight of fear they had carried for so long. It was a great weekend, Robert commented softly so as not to wake the children. It was perfect. Mrs. Janet agreed from the passenger seat. Looking in the rearview mirror at his sleeping children, Robert knew this was just the beginning. There would still be challenges ahead. Eleanor's threat still lingered. Emotional traumas would need time and professional help to overcome, and he himself was still learning to be the father his children deserved. But for the first time in a long time, the future seemed promising. The Miller family was finally finding its way back to the light. 6 months later, life at the Miller estate had found a new balance, lighter and more genuine. Robert had completely reorganized his professional routine, delegating responsibilities and refusing long trips. Michael and Beatrice began therapy with Dr. Martha, a child psychologist specializing in emotional trauma, and the results were already visible. Beatrice had resumed playing the piano with pleasure, no longer as an obligation. Michael had rediscovered his passion for sports, especially swimming. That Thursday afternoon, Robert was in his home office, reviewing some contracts while awaiting the children's return from school. Mrs. Janet had gone to pick them up as she did every day. The sound of rain hitting the windows created a cozy atmosphere, perfect for working. The phone rang, breaking Robert's concentration. It was Marcus, his personal assistant. "Boss, we have a situation here at the office." Marcus's voice sounded tense. "Eleanor showed up. She's causing a scene at the reception, saying she urgently needs to speak with you about the children." Robert felt his stomach drop. Since the day of the Child Protective Services visit, he hadn't heard directly from Eleanor, although his lawyers had dealt with some empty threats of lawsuits from her. "Did she say what she wants?" "Not exactly. Just that it's an emergency related to Michael and Beatrice. She's very agitated. Do you want me to call security?" Robert pondered for a moment. Part of him wanted to simply have her thrown out, but his intuition told him it was better to understand what was happening. "No, ask her to wait in the small meeting room. I'm on my way." He hung up and immediately called Mrs. Janet. "Mrs. Janet, have the children left school yet?" "We just left, sir," Mrs. Janet's voice replied with the characteristic noise of Greenwich traffic in the background. "We should be home in about 20 minutes with this storm. Change of plans. Don't come home now. Can you take them to the Grandview Mall, the one with the indoor adventure park they like?" There was a brief pause. Mrs. Janet was too perceptive not to notice that something was wrong. "Did something happen, sir?" "Eleanor showed up at the office. I don't know what she wants, but I prefer the children to be far away and distracted while I sort this out." "Understood," Mrs. Janet replied, her voice more serious. "I'll keep them entertained at the park and then we can have a snack. I'll call if you need more time." "Thank you, Mrs. Janet. Please don't mention anything to the children. I don't want to worry them." "You can count on it. Don't worry." Robert hung up and grabbed his car keys. The rain was falling harder now, turning the garden into temporary streams. As he drove to the office in Midtown Manhattan, his mind raced with possibilities. What could Eleanor want now? Money? Revenge? Or was it just another one of her manipulative games? When he arrived at the imposing building that housed the headquarters of Miller Developments, Robert went directly to the designated meeting room, ignoring the curious glances of employees who had certainly already heard about the scene in the reception area. Eleanor was sitting at the table, nervously fiddling with her phone. She had changed since he last saw her. Her hair, once long and impeccably styled, was now short and lacked its former luster. Her clothes, though still designer, seemed less cared for. But what was most striking were her eyes. There was something feverish in them, almost desperate. "Robert," she stood up immediately upon seeing him. "Finally. We need to talk." "About what exactly?" he asked, staying near the door, making no move to sit down. Eleanor ran a hand through her hair, a nervous gesture that did not match her usual composure. "It's about the children. I'm worried about them." "Worried?" Robert raised his eyebrows, incredulous. "After everything you did, you have the audacity to say you're worried." "You don't understand," she insisted, approaching. "That woman, that housekeeper, she's not who you think she is." "Mrs. Janet? What about her?" "She manipulated everything, Robert. Those videos, the children, you... It was all part of her plan." Robert felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. After everything, Eleanor was still trying to shift the blame. "What plan would that be, Eleanor?" "Enlighten me. She wants to take my place. Don't you see? From the beginning, she wanted to get rid of me to be with you, with the children, with everything that was rightfully mine." The absurdity of the accusation almost made Robert laugh, if not for the gravity of the situation. "Nothing was rightfully yours, Eleanor. You were a guest in my home, someone I trusted to help care for my children, and you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way." Eleanor shook her head frantically. No, you don't understand. I have proof that she's not trustworthy." She opened her purse and took out an envelope, pushing it across the table towards Robert. Reluctantly, he took it and opened it. Inside were some photos and documents. "What is this?" "The real Janet Alves," Eleanor replied, a triumphant glint in her eyes. "I hired a private investigator to look into her. Do you know what I found out? She was once accused of theft at a previous job. And look at this." She pointed to one of the photos where Mrs. Janet was seen talking to a man in a cafe. "This is her brother, Anthony Allen. He has 3 police records for fraud. They're plotting together, Robert. They'll gain your trust and then pull a scam." Robert looked at the documents with growing irritation. The criminal record Eleanor presented was clearly falsified. The dates didn't match. There were basic formatting errors. And the alleged theft would have occurred at a time when Mrs. Janet had already been working for his family for years. "This is pathetic." "Eleanor," he said, returning the papers, "these documents are obviously fake. And even if they weren't, they don't change what we saw in the videos, nor what my children confirmed." Eleanor's face contorted into an expression of rage. "You're blind. She bewitched you, just like she did the children." "Bewitched?" Robert repeated, incredulous. "Are you listening to yourself? You sound insane." "Don't call me insane," she shouted, banging on the table. "I have a right to be in that house. I dedicated 2 years of my life to those children." "Dedicated? You terrorized them. You destroyed their self-esteem, made them feel responsible for their own mother's death. I was educating them for real life. This world doesn't forgive weaknesses, Robert. I was preparing them to be strong." Robert shook his head, realizing the futility of the discussion. "This conversation is over, Eleanor. I don't know what you hope to achieve with this charade, but it's over. I don't want to see you near my family again." As he turned to leave, Eleanor grabbed his arm with surprising force. "I'm not finished," she hissed, her eyes wide and intense. "I have something else to show you." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. Robert's heart skipped a beat. It was an image of Michael and Beatrice leaving school, obviously taken without their knowledge. "What the hell is this?" "Just a reminder," Eleanor smiled, but there was no joy in her eyes, only a calculating coldness, "that I can get close to them whenever I want." Something inside Robert exploded. In a swift movement, he snatched the phone from her hand and threw it against the wall with all his might. The device shattered into several fragments. "Is that a threat?" he asked, his voice trembling with rage. "Are you threatening my children?" Eleanor recoiled, momentarily startled by his violent reaction. "It's just a warning," she replied, composing herself. "That we're not finished." "Not yet." Robert took several deep breaths, trying to calm himself. "You need help, Eleanor. Professional help. And if you come near my children again, it won't just be a restraining order you'll face." He headed for the door, but before leaving, he turned one last time. "By the way, your plan didn't work. I just approved Mrs. Janet's new employment contract, as the official governess of the house with all legal benefits. And the children have weekly sessions with a psychologist who is documenting everything that happened under your care. So, if I were you, I'd keep my distance." Robert didn't wait for a response. He left the room and went straight to Marcus's office. "I need you to contact my lawyers immediately," he instructed. "I want a restraining order against Eleanor Carlson today. And reinforced security at the house and the children's school." Marcus nodded, already picking up the phone. "Anything specific I should mention to the lawyers?" "Yes, she's photographing my children without authorization and made a veiled threat. Oh, and I also want to file a police report. Better document everything right away." While Marcus made the calls, Robert sent a message to Mrs. Janet asking how the children were. The reply came quickly. "All good here. Michael is playing video games, and Beatrice found a school friend. We've had a snack. When should I bring them home?" "In about an hour it should be safe," he replied, relieved to know they were okay. The rest of the afternoon was consumed with lawyers and legal procedures. When Robert finally managed to return home, it was past 7 in the evening. He found Mrs. Janet in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the children watched television in the living room. "How was the outing?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Great," Mrs. Janet replied, looking at him carefully. "And you, sir? Did you resolve your matters?" Robert hesitated. He didn't want to worry Mrs. Janet, but he also needed to warn her, more or less. "We need to talk after the children are asleep." She nodded, understanding the seriousness in his tone. "I'll be available, sir." Dinner proceeded normally, with Michael and Beatrice excitedly recounting their afternoon at the mall. Robert did his best to participate in the conversation, but his mind kept returning to the encounter with Eleanor and her veiled threats. After putting the children to bed, he found Mrs. Janet in the living room. She had prepared tea and was waiting patiently, as if she knew the conversation would be difficult. "Mrs. Janet," he began, sitting in the armchair opposite hers. "Eleanor showed up today." The woman showed no surprise. "I imagined that was it. She made accusations against you. Said you have a brother with a police record, that you were once accused of theft." To his surprise, Mrs. Janet let out a short laugh. "My brother? Anthony?" She shook her head, incredulous. "My brother has been a pastor in upstate New York for 15 years, sir. He has 5 children and has never set foot in Greenwich in his life." Robert smiled, relieved to confirm what he had already suspected. "I imagined it was a lie, but there's more." His expression became serious again. "She showed me photos of the children leaving school." "Recent photos?" Mrs. Janet's face paled. "She's following the children?" "Darcy, it seems so. That's why I need to ask that we redouble our precautions. Don't leave the children alone for a minute when they're out of the house. And if you notice any strange person watching or photographing, let me know immediately." "Of course, sir," Mrs. Janet replied, concern evident in her eyes. "Do you think she might try to do something?" "I don't know," Robert admitted. "She's clearly unbalanced. I filed for a restraining order today, but until it's approved, we need to be cautious." Mrs. Janet nodded, determined. "I will protect these children with my life, sir. You can trust me." "I know, Mrs. Janet," Robert smiled, grateful for the dedication of that extraordinary woman. "That's why we all sleep peacefully at night." The storm outside had subsided, but Robert knew that the storm in their lives was just beginning. Eleanor would not give up easily. The question was, how far would she go in her obsession? And more importantly, would they be prepared for what came next? The restraining order against Eleanor was granted in record time, thanks to Robert's influence and the seriousness of the evidence presented. For a few weeks, life at the Miller estate returned to a relative normalcy, albeit with heightened security. A professional driver now took and picked up the children from school, and additional cameras were installed around the property. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 4 months after the incident at the office, the family was enjoying a barbecue by the pool. Robert was at the grill, preparing picanha, his newly discovered culinary specialty. Michael was swimming, proudly displaying his new freestyle stroke, while Beatrice played with her doll collection in the shade of a tree. Mrs. Janet, on her day off, had been invited to join them and was animatedly chatting with Beatrice about the clothes they were making together for the dolls. "Dad, look what I can do," Michael shouted from the pool, preparing to dive. "I see, champ," Be careful not to swallow water. The scene of domestic joy was interrupted by the intercom. Robert frowned. He wasn't expecting visitors. He went to the device installed near the poolside gazebo. Yes? Mr. Miller, sorry to bother you, came the voice of the security guard at the gate. There's a lady here, says she's from Child Protective Services, Dr. Tanya Olson. Robert exchanged a worried glance with Mrs. Janet, who immediately moved closer to the children protectively. Is she alone? Yes, sir. She has official identification and says she needs to make a follow-up visit. Robert pondered for a moment. The caseworker's last visit had been favorable to them, but still, the timing was suspicious. You can let her in. I'll meet her at the front entrance of the house. Turning to Mrs. Janet, he instructed, just in case, take the children inside, okay? Tell them you're going to get a snack or something. Mrs. Janet nodded, immediately understanding his concern. Children, how about we make that special milkshake while Daddy talks to the visitor? The mention of the milkshake made Michael quickly get out of the pool, and soon the three entered the house through the back, while Robert headed for the main entrance. Dr. Tanya stood in the spacious entrance hall when the door opened. She looked the same as before, formal, professional, with her document folder under her arm. Good afternoon. Mr. Miller, sorry to show up unannounced on a Sunday. No problem, Robert replied, maintaining a cordial tone despite his suspicion. How can I help you? Tercy, I'm conducting follow-up visits in cases that have recently been closed. It's standard procedure to check on the children after a few weeks. It seemed plausible, but something in Robert's instinct remained alert. Of course, I understand. Would you like to come in? We were having a barbecue. That would be great. I promise not to take up too much of your time. Robert led the caseworker to the living room, purposely avoiding the pool area. Would you like something to drink? Water, juice? Water would be perfect, thank you. While Robert went to the kitchen to get the water, he found Mrs. Janet and the children preparing the milkshakes. Is it really Dr. Tanya? Mrs. Janet asked in a low voice. It seems so, Robert replied, equally low. But it's strange for her to show up like this on a Sunday. I'll call Child Protective Services tomorrow, Mrs. Janet suggested, just to confirm it was an official visit. Good idea. Robert grabbed a glass of water and returned to the living room. Dr. Tanya was looking at family photos on the shelf. She turned when Robert entered. Your house is beautiful, she commented, accepting the glass of water. And it seems much more alive than the last time I was here. Thank you. We made some changes to the decor. The children now have more freedom to express their personality in all rooms. That's excellent, she smiled. May I speak with them briefly? Of course, Robert agreed, still cautious. They're in the kitchen making milkshakes. I'll call them. When he returned with Michael and Beatrice, he noticed that both seemed nervous. The caseworker's last visit had been a stressful event, even though it ended well. Hello, children, Dr. Tanya greeted with a gentle smile. Do you remember me? Yes, Michael replied, staying close to his father. You're from Child Protective Services. That's right. I just wanted to see how you're doing. It looks like you were having a lot of fun outside. We're having a barbecue, Beatrice explained, seeming to relax a little. And Mrs. Janet and I are sewing clothes for my dolls. How nice. And how are classes going? Are you still doing those extra studies Aunt Eleanor used to give you? The mention of Eleanor's name made both children visibly tense. Robert placed his hands on their shoulders protectively. No, Michael replied, his voice firmer than Robert expected. Now we just do normal schoolwork, and we have time to play. And Daddy is always home for dinner. Dr. Tanya nodded, making some notes. And do you still see Dr. Martha, the psychologist? Yes, Beatrice smiled shyly. She's nice. We play and talk. That's good. The caseworker seemed genuinely satisfied. She looked at Robert. It seems things have really improved a lot since my last visit. We've been working on it every day, he responded. The children are slowly recovering. I can see that. She closed her folder, seeming to conclude the visit. Well, I don't want to disrupt your Sunday any further. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Miller. Not at all, we're always available. Robert escorted the caseworker to the door, a little calmer now that the visit had gone smoothly. However, upon opening the front door, he was met with an unexpected scene. Eleanor was standing next to a taxi at the house entrance, watching them. What is she doing here? Robert murmured, instinctively blocking the doorway to protect those inside the house. Dr. Tanya followed his gaze and seemed genuinely surprised. "Do you know that woman?" "That's Eleanor Carlson, the person against whom we have a restraining order." The caseworker frowned. "And she's deliberately violating the court order by showing up here?" "It appears so." Eleanor, realizing she had been seen, began to walk towards the house. There was something erratic in her movements. "Better call the police," Dr. Tanya suggested, already pulling out her own phone. "I'm already doing that," Robert replied, dialing the security guard's number at the gate. "Carl, there's a woman at the property entrance." "It's Eleanor Carlson. She's not allowed near the house. Call the police immediately." "Mr. Miller, she just entered." The security guard's voice sounded worried. "She said she was with the lady from Child Protective Services, showed a badge." Robert felt his blood run cold. "Stay on the line and call for backup right now. She's violating a restraining order." Eleanor had stopped a few yards from the entrance, the taxi driving away behind her. Her eyes, even from a distance, seemed disturbingly empty. "Robert," she called, her voice strangely calm. "We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about, Eleanor," he replied firmly. "You are violating a court order. The police are on their way." "The police?" She laughed, a sound devoid of any joy. "Always resorting to your connections, aren't you? Your money solves everything, doesn't it?" "Mr. Miller," Dr. Tanya spoke softly beside him. "She seems unstable." "Better not provoke her," Robert silently agreed. "Eleanor, leave now and avoid more trouble for yourself." "Trouble?" She laughed again. "You ruined my life. I had everything planned perfectly. The children were becoming exactly what they should be, strong, disciplined, worthy of the Miller name." Her face twisted into a grimace of anger. "And then that meddling housekeeper ruins everything." At that moment, Robert saw a movement out of the corner of his eye. Mrs. Janet had appeared in the corridor behind him, probably drawn by the commotion. Upon seeing Mrs. Janet, Eleanor completely lost control. "You," she screamed, pointing an accusing finger. "You destroyed everything I built. The only thing you built was an environment of terror for innocent children." Mrs. Janet replied calmly, though Robert could detect a tremor in her voice. "Mrs. Janet, please go back inside," Robert requested, worried. "Stay with the children." But it was too late. Eleanor, seeing her main target, began to advance determinedly towards the house. Robert positioned himself firmly in the doorway. "Not another step, Eleanor. Get out of the way," she hissed. "That woman needs to hear some truths." "The only truth here is that you're sick," Robert replied, maintaining his composure despite the growing tension. "You need professional help." "I'm not sick," Eleanor screamed, her voice rising several octaves. "I'm seeing everything clearly for the first time. She bewitched you, bewitched the children." The situation was escalating rapidly. In the background, Robert could hear sirens approaching. The police were coming. "Are the children here?" Eleanor suddenly asked, looking past Robert, as if she could see through the walls. "Michael, Beatrice, come here. Your aunt needs to talk to you." The desperation in her voice was palpable. Robert felt a shiver of fear at the thought that she might try something against the children. "They won't talk to you," he stated firmly. "Never again." The sirens were closer now. Eleanor seemed to notice, looking nervously around. "You're going to keep me away from them forever? Is that it?" Tears began to stream down her face. "They're like children to me. I molded them. I dedicated my life to them." "What you call molding, we call abuse," Robert replied, not yielding an inch. "What you call dedication was manipulation and cruelty." 2 patrol cars entered through the main gate, followed by a private security car. Eleanor looked at the vehicles, then back at the house, as if calculating her chances. "It's over, Eleanor," Robert said, almost with pity. Surprisingly, she did not resist when the police approached. She seemed to have suddenly emptied, all fury giving way to a melancholic resignation. "Officers, this woman is violating a restraining order," Dr. Tanya informed the police, showing her Child Protective Services identification. "I witnessed her verbally threatening the residents of this house." As the police escorted Eleanor to the patrol car, she looked one last time at Robert. "You'll regret this," she said, but her voice no longer carried the same conviction. "One day you'll realize I was right." Robert did not reply. There was nothing left to be said. After the patrol cars left, he, Mrs. Janet, and Dr. Tanya went back inside the house. The children were in the living room, clinging to each other, clearly shaken. "Has she gone?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. Robert knelt in front of his children. "Yes, son. And she won't be coming back." "She was screaming," Beatrice commented, tears in her eyes. "Like those nights." "I know, Princess." Robert hugged them both tightly. "But it's over. Truly this time." Dr. Tanya observed the scene with a professional yet compassionate expression. "Mr. Miller, I will need to document this incident, and I strongly suggest that you file for involuntary commitment for psychiatric evaluation of Miss Carlson. She clearly poses a risk to herself and others." "I'll do that first thing tomorrow," Robert assured. "And thank you very much for your help today." After the caseworker left, the family tried to resume their interrupted Sunday. The barbecue cooled, the milkshakes melted, but no one seemed to care much. Sitting together in the living room with a children's movie on television, they found comfort in each other's presence. "Do you think she'll really stay away now?" Mrs. Janet quietly asked Robert, while the children were distracted by the movie. "I think so," he replied thoughtfully. "She finally crossed a line that cannot be ignored. With luck, she'll get the treatment she needs." "The children will need time to process this," Mrs. Janet observed, looking with affection at Michael and Beatrice, who were now laughing at a comical scene in the movie. "We all do," Robert smiled tiredly. "But we have all the time in the world now." 6 months later, life at the Miller estate had found a new equilibrium. The incident with Eleanor became a distant memory, especially after she was admitted to a psychiatric clinic in another state. Reports indicated that she suffered from narcissistic personality disorder with obsessive traits, which explained, but did not justify, her behavior. On a Saturday afternoon, the house was full of life and noise. Michael was celebrating his 11th birthday with a superhero-themed party. The garden was decorated with colorful balloons. A ball pit had been set up near the gazebo, and a dessert table that would make any child dream occupied the center of the party area. Robert watched his children playing with their friends, a permanent smile on his face. For the first time in years, they seemed truly like children, carefree, noisy, free. Mrs. Janet approached, bringing a tray of freshly baked chicken croquettes. She no longer wore a uniform on any occasion. As the official governess of the house and practically part of the family, she dressed as she pleased. "You look happy, sir," she commented, placing the tray on a table. "And I am," Robert confirmed. "Look at them, Mrs. Janet. Who would have thought after everything we've been through?" Beatrice ran through the garden with 2 friends, all dressed as heroines, makeshift capes fluttering behind them. Michael, in the center of a group of boys, animatedly explained the rules of a game he had invented. "Children are resilient," Mrs. Janet smiled. "And they had help. Dr. Martha worked wonders with them." "And you too," Robert added, looking gratefully at the woman who had become the heart of the home. "I can never thank you enough for what you've done for us." Mrs. Janet, the housekeeper who had become a governess, and then practically a second mother to the children, shook her head in modest disagreement. "I did what anyone with a heart would do, sir. Nothing more." "Not everyone would have your courage," Robert insisted. "You risked everything, your job, your safety, to protect my children. That makes you much more than anyone." Mrs. Janet blushed at the compliment. In recent months, her relationship with Robert had evolved into a genuine friendship, based on mutual respect and a shared love for the children. She was no longer just an employee, but a counselor, confidant, and essential part of the family that had formed from the ashes of fear. "Dad." "Mrs. Janet," Michael's voice cut across the garden. "Come see my new trick on the trampoline." Exchanging knowing smiles, Robert and Mrs. Janet headed to where the birthday boy was, surrounded by friends eager to show off their own acrobatic skills. Life moved on, lighter and brighter than any of them could have imagined during the dark days. The courage of a simple woman had illuminated the path to liberation for an entire family, proving that sometimes true heroism lies in the quietest gestures, and that the seemingly weakest voices can be the most powerful when they speak the truth. The children's laughter echoed through the garden, healing the last vestiges of pain that might still linger in the corners of that home. And in that moment, watching the pure joy on his children's faces, Robert knew they had finally found what truly mattered. Not the perfection Eleanor valued so much, but authenticity, genuine affection, the freedom to be exactly who they were, imperfect, noisy, and completely happy. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Robert, his children, and the courageous Mrs. Janet has touched your hearts. How many times in real life do we fail to see the silent suffering happening around us? How many Janets are out there, gathering courage to do what is right even when everyone doubts? If this narrative has stirred emotions in you, don't keep it to yourself. We have a special playlist with other stories that explore the strength of family bonds and courage in its various forms. Find it by clicking here, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every interaction helps us continue bringing stories that move, inspire, and make us reflect on the true heroes of our everyday lives. See you in the comments.